My golden child sister got my parents to cut me off after her divorce because I was friends with the husband she cheated on, but now she wants me to pay for her new wedding. 3 years ago, my twin sister stopped talking to me and also forced our parents to do the same for the dumbest reason you can imagine. For context, my sister Emma was in the process of divorcing her husband at the time, 3 years ago. Her husband, Kevin, happened to be a good friend of mine, and they had met because of me. Kevin and I went to college together and became really good friends. Although he and I were close, Emma and I didn't get along very well. She's my twin sister, and though she's only 16 minutes younger than me, she was always treated like the baby of the family. That meant she got the golden child treatment from our parents. I guess maybe it was because she was their only daughter or something, but I always felt like my parents were softer on her and harder on me because I was their son. Naturally, there was some level of resentment toward her because I always felt like my parents treated her better than me, and because she got away with everything. She was also a bit spoiled. That's why we didn't get along very well. I remember once my parents tagged me in a family photo we had taken at Christmas, and both my sister and I were in it. It appeared on my profile, and Kevin saw it and asked me to introduce him to my sister because he was really smitten with her at first sight. I declined his request for a long time, but after a couple of weeks, when I realized he wasn't going to give up, I decided to talk to Emma about it. Even though we didn't exactly get along, Kevin was a good friend of mine, and if he wanted to date her, I wasn't going to stop him. So I asked her if it was okay to share her number with this guy, and she seemed fine with it. I introduced them. They started dating when we were in our first year of college, and they were in a relationship for 6 years before deciding to get engaged. I was happy for them since, because of her relationship with Kevin, Emma had become somewhat tolerable as well. When they got married, I was the best man and was genuinely happy for both of them. They stayed together for 2 years before the marriage fell apart, and it was a really ugly divorce because, being Emma, she decided to cheat on him. There wasn't even a reason for her to cheat. She seemed reasonably happy with him, but despite that, she had an affair with a coworker, and Kevin found out by checking her phone. When he confronted her, she told him she was bored and that the affair didn't mean anything to her, so she was willing to end it and work things out with him. But these kinds of things don't just get worked out like that. Kevin decided to leave, and she had the audacity to demand alimony even though she had been working and had had an affair, so she didn't qualify for it. The divorce got pretty nasty, and I was firmly on Kevin's side because even though Emma was my sister, she was the one who cheated, and it's not like I got along with her anyway, so I knew where my priorities lay. And I guess that didn't sit well with her because she ended up complaining to our parents and said she didn't approve of my friendship with her soon-to-be ex-husband. She claimed that, as part of her family, I should have been on her side without question. I don't know what's wrong with my parents, but they actually found her complaint valid and decided to call a family meeting based on her grievances. So they invited me to dinner and confronted me about my continued friendship with Kevin. They told me they wanted me to cut him out of my life because he had wronged my sister, and as family, I shouldn't tolerate that. I thought it was ridiculous and irrational and told them that Kevin had been my friend for a long time, and I wasn't going to cut him out of my life. I definitely would have done so if he had been the one who cheated, but Emma was the one who cheated without any reason, so I didn't see any reason to end my friendship with him. She was sitting there, so she got very offended and said I had always been insecure about her, and it was starting to show. She accused me of deliberately trying to sabotage her so she wouldn't get anything out of the divorce. I lost my temper and told her she didn't deserve anything anyway since she was a cheater with no morals or ethics. We had a pretty nasty verbal fight that day, and I ended up leaving early. I expected my parents to reach out to me in the following days, and they did, but only to tell me they were cutting me off because Emma had given them an ultimatum and they were going to take it seriously. Apparently, after my fight with her that day, Emma told them she didn't want them to talk to me anymore because I had made it very clear that I didn't take family seriously and wasn't loyal to them. Since I had no concept of family loyalty, I needed to learn a lesson. She told them they had to choose between her and me. I wasn't at all surprised to hear that my parents had chosen to take her side. I didn't even argue with them when they called me. After telling me this, they sounded very disappointed and tried to say I could end all of this if I cut Kevin out of my life. But at that point, it had become a matter of principle. So I wished them the best for the future and stopped talking to them. It's been 3 years since then, and Kevin and I are still friends, but I haven't spoken a word to my family. I see them occasionally, but we avoid each other as much as we can, and it makes me sad to think my parents chose Emma over me, but it is what it is. I didn't think they would contact me anytime soon, but recently my parents decided to. It wasn't to apologize, unfortunately, but to ask for help. Recently, I've made a lot of money because my business suddenly took off. I own a restaurant, and after a particularly good review from a really popular blogger, people started flocking in, and it's been a very good few months since then. I guess my parents did the math and decided to contact me because they needed money. The funny thing is, they don't even need the money for themselves. They need it to help Emma. Apparently, she's getting married again. I guess she lied to Kevin about how serious things were with the coworker she was having an affair with because, from what I know, that's the person she's marrying. They've been together since she divorced and got engaged a couple of months ago. I knew about it, but it's not like I was going to be invited, so I didn't think much of it. About 4 days ago, my parents visited me, and I was pretty surprised to see them. They were being nice enough, so I invited them in. The reason I didn't just shut the door in their faces was that, firstly, I'm not that kind of person, and secondly, I made the mistake of assuming they were here to fix things with me by apologizing, and that was my mistake. Anyway, after some small talk about my life and business, my parents got to the point and told me Emma was getting married again and wanted it to be a grand event because she wanted people to forget about her first wedding and only remember this one. That sounded pretty much like something Emma would do, so I wasn't surprised. But then they got to the budget and told me that, as of now, it was going to cost an astounding $90,000 to cover the kind of wedding Emma wanted. At this point, it was nothing short of a luxury wedding, and we didn't come from a family of that stature. My dad was a retired real estate agent, and my mom was a college history professor. So yeah, I'd say they both earned a decent amount of money while working and had saved reasonably for their future, but spending $90,000 on a wedding was unimaginable. My parents told me the wedding was still several months away, so it wasn't like they needed the money immediately. They could afford to contribute some from their retirement fund, but they obviously couldn't cover the entire cost. The fiancé's family had already said they couldn't help, but my parents didn't want Emma to feel disappointed, so they had already committed to covering the whole cost of the wedding. That had been before Emma started planning and told them about the budget, and now they didn't know what to tell her because there was no way they could afford it without severely affecting their retirement savings. They didn't want to disappoint her, so they had been thinking about what to do, and eventually, they'd heard from a few people that my restaurant was doing well. They took it as a sign from the universe to visit me and talk about contributing to the wedding expenses. They told me this wedding meant everything to Emma because, after her divorce from Kevin, she had to go to therapy due to how traumatizing it had been for her. Now, I had the chance to be a good brother for once and contribute to the wedding. The last time she asked me for something, I refused, and we ended up not speaking for 3 years. Now I had the chance to fix that by covering her wedding expenses and making it up to her. Honestly, I thought they were joking because there was no way they could be delusional enough to believe I was actually going to help them here. Even if I were a billionaire, I wouldn't have contributed anything to Emma's wedding, and that's what I told my parents. But of course, I said that after laughing in their faces because I genuinely couldn't process the audacity of them coming to me after 3 years, not even apologizing, but pretending like I had done something wrong by cutting them off instead of Kevin. Anyway, after laughing in their faces and saying that, I guess my parents got really offended, and instead of leaving, they started trying to argue with me. They told me there was nothing funny about the situation, and that Emma was right when she said I had no concept of family loyalty because, even now, when presented with an opportunity to make amends with my sister on a silver platter, I was still refusing to help her. This time, it was my parents accusing me of being jealous and insecure about my sister and saying that I was extremely stingy. That didn't sit right with me at all because I could understand Emma saying those things since she was that delusional and stupid. But my parents knew exactly what they had done. So I really lost my temper and told them they had no right to say any of this to me because they were the reason I didn't get along with Emma in the first place. I brought up how they had treated her and me differently all the time, and it was them who had created a rift between us by spoiling her excessively and then expecting me to always put up with it. I told them they had failed as parents, and that was why Emma had turned into a total monster who didn't care about her own parents at all, thinking it was completely fine to ask them to pay for such an extravagant wedding. It was also their fault that not even their son was willing to help them. So maybe they thought they at least had one child who cared about them. But if Emma truly cared about them, she wouldn't have asked them to cover the cost of the wedding. She would have done the math, realized it was way out of budget for a moderately successful real estate agent and a professor, and downsized the wedding or tried to get the money herself. But she didn't care about any of that. She only cared about herself, and I didn't feel the need to care about my parents because, well, it's not like they cared about me. So at the end of the day, it was their own behavior that left them with 2 kids who didn't bother to think about them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. After saying this, my mom started crying, and my dad cursed at me before leaving with her. At that moment, I didn't feel bad for them at all because I was really angry. But a few hours ago, I got a text from my dad saying he was really disappointed in me because what I said broke his heart and my mom was in terrible condition because of me. Now, I need some opinions from you guys. So what do you think? Am I the bad guy for telling my parents they have 2 kids who don't care about them and that it's their own fault? Update 1. After reading the comments and speaking with some of you privately, it's clear I have nothing to feel bad about. Anyway, It's been a week since I talked to them, and now I've blocked them. It's funny how my dad specifically unblocked me just to send that message, when in the last 3 years he hadn't even bothered to check on me. It just shows how selfish and unfeeling they are. And that's to say, I don't care because I don't, and that's the truth. As for whether Kevin knew Emma was getting remarried, yes, he did. She posted about her engagement a couple of months ago, and that's when he found out, so he's been aware for quite a while, and he's okay with it. The divorce was really messy and terrible for both of them, so I guess that process really helped him get over her, and now he has absolutely no feelings for her. He hadn't been dating anyone for a while after the divorce, but last year, he started seeing other people as well. He's doing pretty well, and we try to catch up every other weekend. In fact, I told him about my parents' visit and their request for me to contribute to Emma's second wedding, and he also told me I did the right thing by refusing. We had a good laugh realizing that apparently, Emma had to go to therapy after the divorce because it was so traumatizing for her. When as far as we remember, she was the one who made up a bunch of lies to paint Kevin as the villain during the divorce to get the alimony she wanted and justify her cheating. I don't understand why she would need therapy after being the one who traumatized everyone. Anyway, I'm keeping a safe distance from my parents and going back to not speaking with them. That's best for my mental health, and I hope they don't contact me again because I'd hate to get dragged into this mess again. Update 2. About 2 weeks ago, my parents visited me, and that meeting didn't go well at all. After that, I blocked them and hoped they wouldn't contact me again, but today, they called me once more. I suppose they used a disposable phone because I didn't recognize the number. Anyway, they called me while I was working and was pretty distracted, so I ended up answering, thinking it was an important call. But as soon as I heard my dad's voice on the other end, I was about to hang up. I didn't because he said he was outside my restaurant and was desperate to see me. He insisted that he needed to talk to me over coffee and couldn't leave without speaking to me. I tried to tell him I was at work and would be busy for the next several hours, but he said he was willing to wait. He sounded so desperate and I was somewhat worried, so I agreed to meet him. Otherwise, he might have come into my restaurant and caused a scene. He didn't say so explicitly, but it could have happened, and that was the last thing I wanted. So, I decided to take the loss and just have coffee with him. After that call, I couldn't get back to work because I was so distracted and upset with my dad. I decided to take a break and went to meet him at the cafe he said he'd be at. It was close by, so I walked over. When I saw my dad sitting inside, I went straight to him and told him what he was doing was absolutely unacceptable. I told him he couldn't harass me at work just because he wanted money from me. He said he wasn't there to talk about money, he was there to talk about my mom, and that surprised me. He explained that after our last conversation, my mom had completely broken down and hadn't been the same since. Even though it had been 2 weeks since we saw each other, she hadn't been able to return to normal and had become a shadow of her former self. So now, the only thing that could help her was for me to visit her and talk to her. My dad also seemed pretty distressed, so I found myself in a tough spot. I didn't want to hurt them intentionally, but at the same time, I didn't feel obligated to go see my mom, especially since she hadn't bothered to talk to me in the past 3 years. The relationship between us had been really bad. After thinking about it for a while, I told my dad I didn't have time to go see her in person, even if I agreed to visit. I didn't know what he expected me to say because it would be a lie to say I forgave them, because I haven't. I can't forgive them because they've never apologized. My dad started getting very upset when I said I wouldn't go see my mom. He said my mom was in a very bad emotional state because she was so affected by what I said the other day about neither of their kids caring about them. To be fair, my mom has always been very delicate and emotionally fragile. It never took much to make her cry or hurt her. Even when we were younger, everyone in the family knew we had to tread lightly when speaking to her. I agree that my mom is deeply sensitive, but so am I. And if she can't get over things, neither can I. I tried explaining that to my dad, but he told me that for once, I needed to put our differences aside and go see my mom because she had completely fallen apart. At one point, we were talking in circles, so I firmly told him that I wasn't going to see anyone, at least not until they both apologized to me. Even then, I'd need time to think about it. For the past 3 years, they hadn't even reached out to me, and before that, they didn't really treat me well. So naturally, it's become very hard for me to see them the way I used to, or even care about them. I've built a life for myself without them, and they didn't seem to care about that until they needed me, or rather, my money. I was also very upset when they cut me out of their lives, but they didn't seem to care about that either, nor did they check on me, even though I was deeply hurt as well. I told my dad I wasn't going to see my mom and that I was really busy. I warned him that if he tried to harass me at work again, I'd have no choice but to call the police. Not just at work, I didn't want them visiting me anywhere. I made it clear I was serious, and then went back to the restaurant because I had a lot to take care of. I thought he might try something else later in the day, But fortunately, that didn't happen. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm really tired of this, and I regret letting them back into my life that day in the first place. Update 3. Here I am again, but this time, fortunately, it's not directly because of my parents. Well, technically it is, but at least not directly. So, I haven't had to talk to them yet. But first, I want to address the person who said I should have called the police on my dad and that I'm a doormat for not doing so. I guess you've never run a restaurant, otherwise, you'd know it's not good for business to have the police show up in the middle of service. If I hadn't agreed to see him, he probably would have come in and caused a scene, which also isn't great for reviews. People pay for a peaceful experience, not to have a lunatic yelling in their faces or the police walking in. Anyway, back to the update. While I haven't had a good relationship with my family for the past 3 years, I've gotten along with other relatives. They all know we had a falling out a few years ago and haven't been in contact since. They also know the reason, but no one really wanted to get involved in the drama, so they stayed out of it, inviting me and my family separately to any events they held, like weddings, birthdays, and other parties. Recently, one of my cousins announced her pregnancy, and I noticed that my family hadn't been invited to the celebration. When I asked about it, she told me it wasn't because of me, but because she'd had a minor argument with my sister a few weeks before the party, around the time she posted the pregnancy announcement online. Apparently, Emma had accused her of trying to steal the spotlight because her wedding had been just a couple of months earlier. She was so crazy that she thought our cousin got pregnant on purpose to overshadow the bride. It was clearly ridiculous, and our cousin decided to cut ties with her because you don't need that kind of negativity when you're pregnant. I mean, can you really blame her for cutting Emma off? By extension, she also decided not to invite my parents because they had taken the liberty of contacting our cousin's parents and accusing her of being some kind of spoiled child for making a big fuss about her pregnancy, knowing that Emma was getting married in a few months. So, out of my family, I was the only person invited because my cousin knew I had nothing to do with them. Even though the rest of them weren't invited, and it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with their own behavior, they decided to blame me. They posted a statement online saying that they had kept quiet about my jealous and insecure behavior toward Emma for a long time because they didn't want to ruin my reputation in the family or elsewhere. But now, since I had turned the family against them, they felt forced to speak out. They made it seem like it was my fault that my cousin hadn't invited them to the pregnancy announcement party. Not only that, but they also painted me as the villain for still being friends with Kevin, even though he had supposedly ruined my sister's mental health during their divorce. Of course, they didn't mention the fact that she had been cheating on him. Why would they? They called me selfish, insecure, and a loser, and said they were glad they no longer had to call me their son because they were going to disinherit me. I wish I could say I cared, but honestly, I don't. A lot of people sent me that post since I can't see it myself because I'm blocked, and I told them not to bother arguing with my family because they're clearly out of line. No one who really matters will believe anything in that post, so it's not causing any real harm to my reputation. They can keep talking. I'm so far above all this nonsense. At the same time, I'm really grateful to the relatives who are on my side because so far, even though they didn't want to get involved in the drama, I'm pretty sure they're all going to stay away from my parents and my sister. Update 4. It's been a couple of months since my last post here because, honestly, there wasn't much to talk about. After the statement my parents posted online blaming me for everything that was going wrong, most of our relatives have pretty much stopped talking to my family altogether. I'm pretty sure they would have blamed me for that too, but there was no point in making more posts against me since the damage was already done, and it had reached a point of no return. I was quite happy without them, and now I'm even happier since I recently found out from some relatives still in contact with my parents that apparently Emma has cut them off. My parents hadn't been present at her wedding, which took place a few weeks ago, raising a lot of questions. Some relatives still in touch with them decided to ask what was going on, and my parents told them they had to inform Emma that her wedding budget was way beyond their means and they couldn't afford it. So, they had a big fight because Emma was upset that they had promised to cover all the expenses and were now backing out of their word. They tried to explain that they had made those promises assuming it would be within their budget, but her plans were too extravagant. They also had to think about their own future since they are both retired now. Emma didn't like that, and being the spoiled brat she is, she decided to cut them off and make her fiancé and his family pay for the wedding. This meant they had to significantly downsize the wedding and have a normal one. But without her parents, Emma doesn't seem affected by any of this, but my parents are very upset from what I've heard, and they're very disappointed that none of their children seem to care about them, which is fair because that's exactly what I said from the start. Anyway, things are going well for me, so I don't really care about any of this. This just proves you can't escape karma, and eventually, it catches up with you. That's what happened to my parents. Soon it'll catch up to Emma too, so honestly, I wish them luck. Update 5. I thought I'd have nothing else to say, but it seems life keeps turning, and there are more updates to share. First, about Emma. It seems karma isn't done with her. I've learned from some relatives that Emma has been unfaithful to her new husband. From what I've been told, her husband and she no longer work together because he accepted a new job at another company. This left Emma at her old workplace, and it seems she wasted no time starting an affair with a new coworker. I don't know the details, but I do know it's someone new to the job, and it hasn't even been 2 years since her wedding. From what I've heard, Emma and her husband are going through a crisis in their marriage. There hasn't been talk of divorce yet, but things don't look good. I'm surprised, but at the same time not really, considering how she behaved during her first marriage. All I can say is that I hope her husband is prepared for what's coming, because if there's one thing I've learned over this time, it's that Emma likes to make outrageous demands in divorces, and she's got experience. Maybe it's karma for him too, though I wouldn't wish Emma on my worst enemy, really. As for my parents, I've learned a few new things as well. It seems that ever since Emma cut them off, things have only gone from bad to worse for them. At first, they thought Emma would come back to them, especially after her new marriage started showing cracks, but that hasn't happened. Emma still isn't speaking to them, and I've heard they're becoming more depressed and isolated. Some relatives have tried to reach out to them, but my parents have rejected the help. I think they're starting to realize how their actions have affected the whole family, but they're not ready to admit it or make changes. Apparently, my sister is heading for her second divorce. At this rate, she'll start collecting them.